Good evening and welcome everybody. We're going to get started shortly, but just before we do, a few notes about Zoom. The first is that closed captions are available for this meeting. If you click on the button Live Transcript at the bottom of your screen, you can adjust the settings there. The next is that this meeting is being recorded so that we can send it out after. So if you miss anything, stay tuned to your email and you'll receive a copy of this meeting. You have been muted to reduce background noise for this meeting, but we do want to hear from you. So we encourage you to use the chat box throughout the evening for any questions or comments, and as we get started by introducing yourself in the chat box, letting us know where you're joining from and what questions you hope to have answered here tonight. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Mary. Have a great meeting.
Thanks, Megan. Hi, everyone, and welcome. My name is Mary. I live in the beautiful village of Blair, and I'd like to welcome you to Blair Engaged second community meeting tonight. And it is getting late on a very gorgeous day, so I am extra grateful for your time and your attention today, and the opportunity that we have to be able to spend this time together to learn more and to support each other. Before we get started, I would just like to say a few words about a land acknowledgement. We in the village of Blair acknowledge that the land on which we work and live are lands traditionally used by the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, and Neutral peoples. We also acknowledge the enduring presence and deep traditional knowledge, laws, and philosophies of the Indigenous peoples with whom we share this land today. We are all treaty people with a responsibility to honor all our relations. And I would like to graciously request that we all take a moment of silence tonight to acknowledge the discovery of almost 1,000 children so far, a long hidden tragedy in residential schools across the country, and to pray for all those who have lost loved ones. So if you'll just bear with me a moment to take a moment of silence for those. Thank you so much for that. So right now I'd like to turn the mic over to Mike. That is Mike Bockwell, who is an organizer, activist, and consultant, and generally just an amazing guy. Mike manages one of the most extraordinary teams that I've ever encountered. This is the team at Water Watchers. And Mike is going to be our moderator for this evening. And Mike is literally one of the best people to have on your team when you're in a David versus Goliath situation. So I am so honored that he is going to be here with us tonight to take us through our evening together. So over to you, Mike.
Thank you, Mary, for your generous introduction. Welcome, everybody. The agenda this evening is Blair Engaged, as you know, is engaged in protecting the community, both from the potential impacts of a huge development and also to assert and protect your rights to democratic participation. And so they've retained Susan Robertson, who I'm going to introduce in a moment, to do a planning report. And Susan, that report has been provided to Blair Engaged, and Susan's going to give us the highlights of that tonight. And you're going to have an opportunity to ask her questions. As Megan said at the beginning, the way to pose a question is to put it in the chat box. As Susan's talking, if something occurs to you, please put it in the chat box, and I'll be sure that that question gets asked of her after her presentation. As I mentioned, maybe I suggested at the start, while the warehouse has impacts for the Blair neighborhood because it's so close to that neighborhood, it has impacts for all of Cambridge. And we heard at our previous meeting what some of those impacts were. And it does fit within a pattern. The council's move to evade public scrutiny and to seek provincial legislation to override local community planning appears to be part of a larger trend that's been going on in Cambridge for a while. So we're going to hear tonight from Tamara and Tom Hetherington with the Blackbridge Community Association, who are going to share with us their experience, and Karen Scott Booth of the Architectural Conservancy of Ontario, the Cambridge chapter, about her experience with the Preston Springs Hotel. Again, we'll provide opportunities for you to ask questions, and David Donnelly, then, who's a lawyer who Blair Engaged has retained, is going to connect the dots between all of these experiences and talk about how you can raise your expectations of council and demand better. So that's going to be the major part of the meeting. And then Mary McGrath is going to rejoin us, and we're going to talk about the action plan going forward. We have suggested that you introduce yourself in the chat box. Tell people who you are, where you're from, what part of Cambridge, for example. If you have a general question tonight that you hope will get answered, please put it in there. And then as the presentations are made, pose your questions. And I will also ask all of our presenters, as well as members of the Blair Engaged leadership, that if you wish to answer any of the questions through the chat box, please do that. Please provide additional information. Now, it's been a long time since we've all been able to be in a room together, and I look forward to the time when that's possible again. And the question I always like to ask at the beginning of a meeting is, are we at the same meeting? And I hope we are, and you can indicate that through the chat box. And I'm now going to ask Susan Robertson to turn on her microphone and her camera. Susan's a registered professional planner and a member of the Canadian Institute of Planners with more than 15 years professional experience in watershed heritage and community and Indigenous engagement planning. Susan's work has been the recipient of awards from the National Heritage Trust, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nations, and Heritage Mississauga. Through her company, People Planned Community, Susan practices collaborative planning for a better future together. And that's what we're looking for here, Susan, is a better future together. So thank you very much. And we're going to turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Mike, for that fabulous introduction. Danny, can I count on you to load my slides? Thank you. So much easier when someone does it for you. Thanks, Danny. So my presentation, this is your community. I have a very high-level overview of the contents of my planning report, which has been provided to the Executive Committee of Blair Engaged for their review prior to graphic design. So this is your community. And well, let's take it from there. Community planning matters. Next slide, please. Thank you. So I want to thank Mary for starting off with that land acknowledgement. You did a great job, Mary, and and also for holding the moment of silence. These are really challenging times for many Indigenous communities and indeed all Canadians as we brace our national genocide. But I really want to start off with this slide, and before you're going to see two very old-looking, well, one older than the other, documents. But these documents are married, and these documents impact planning decisions as it relates to land, not just in Ontario, but across the country. So the first is the Royal Proclamation of 1763. This is the founding document of Canada's relations with First Nations or in Indigenous peoples. And the second is the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, the Canadian Constitution Act of 1982. And these two things are connected. These two things impact planning. And you may be asking me how. Well, essentially all of our treaty relationships flow from the Royal Proclamation and the commitments that we've made. And because of the strength of the Royal Proclamation, which was made by King George hundreds of years ago, is that it cannot be ignored in any form of law in Canada, including municipal law and regional law and provincial law, and that the Crown the honor of the Crown essentially is at stake as it relates to all Indigenous relations. And so they have to act honorably. Honorable conduct is mandatory, and that's really what lies at the heart of reconciliation. So Section 35 rights, again, flow from the Royal Proclamation. These two documents are side by side. And there's been, over the years, a growing understanding of how these two documents impact land use planning decisions. And frankly, there's been a lot of professional reluctance to go there, shall we say. But as a result of consistent rulings from the Supreme Court of Canada, planners across Ontario and the country are realizing we need to go there. We can't ignore this any longer. And to this effect, just over the past 3.5 years, both the Canadian Institute of Planners and recently the Ontario Professional Planners Institute, a chapter of the national body, have produced policies on ensuring Indigenous engagement in planning practice. And so the long and the short of this is, we as the Crown essentially has an honor, or has a duty to consult in order to protect its honor. And this cannot be taken away through any legal means. If for means of expediency, or the duty cannot be delegated and it cannot be ignored. But what we're seeing with minister zoning orders is really just that. So if I could have the next slide, please. I like this cartoon. I think it's fun to have images like this in presentations. But I have it alongside a quote from Chief LaRocca, who's the chief of the Mississaugas of Scugog Island First Nation. This is a quote that she publicly posted on Twitter as part of her correspondence on behalf of all Williams Treaty Nations, which are Anishinaabe nations in the Williams Treaty area, which is, like Pickering and Peterborough and Georgina, places like this are Williams Treaty, Newmarket, etc. It's quite a large geography, truthfully, but it's our position. Essentially, this relates to the minister zoning order for the Pickering wetland, that the city of Pickering is without the right to engage such development. This is a matter over which treaty signatories and federal ministries of Crown Indigenous Relations, DFO, NRCan, and the TRCA would have carriage. And so shortly after this letter was released, in a complete swing vote, the City of Pickering Council overturned their request. And it has to relate to my previous slide, that even though the province has gone ahead and issued minister zoning orders in a manner which is completely inconsistent with their original creation decades ago, they were used for very rare instances of the cases of provincial emergency, where there's no municipal planning regime, or where there's a high priority of provincial interest. They've completely changed the game on the intent of the application of minister zoning orders to an open for business model, where you don't need to essentially follow the rules if you're going to build massive warehouses. So the problem is that I believe that the province has erred, the Crown has erred in their judgment in the application of MZOs. And really, I think that the case of the Pickering wetland proves that. That as soon as the Williams Treaty Nations provided written correspondence, all of a sudden, the city completely swung their vote and changed their mind. So that's my professional opinion, and also I think the rule of law. And again, I think the fact of the matter is that a lot of the time it's up to First Nations to prove the Crown wrong. We see this again and again and again. And we hope that we may lean on their support as part of this application. Next slide, please. So my next point is in relation to citizens' participation. So this is Arnstein's ladder. It's from 1969. It's been around for a long time, and it still applies today, and in some ways more so than ever as it relates to the province of Ontario's recent application of MZOs. So you can see here that, when we're moving into citizens control, or rather participatory or collaborative planning, we're seeing partnership, we're seeing delegation, we're seeing citizens able to decide on certain things. And as we start to move more into the in-between zone of the two triangles, opposing triangles, we start to move into the realm of tokenism, where there's placation, consultation, and forming. And then to the bottom of the red triangle, we're moving into what's really institutional control. And that's where MZOs are. It's through therapy, or we're just going to come, we're going to, you know, try to reassure you everything's okay, or we're going to give you something nice to cover up for our mistakes, and manipulation. And really what this is non-participation. There is no room for participation. And in fact, it's been identified as such in accordance with minister zoning orders. There's no right for appeal, they can't be overturned, etc. But again, that does not have recognition for the obligation of the Crown to consult, their duty to consult. So really, with minister zoning orders, and as we see here in the village of Blair, we are losing decades of industry practice. So planning, this is the type of planning that you might have seen 50 or 60 years ago. And it's somehow reared its ugly head. Over the past, especially 25 years, the planning industry, it's really become a core part of the profession to engage meaningfully with communities. And we see again that is completely lost in the name of expediency and open for business planning with the current provincial regime. So this is not planning industry standard. And I want to say that on behalf of my industry and my profession, that this is not best practice. This is not what we do. We have moved much more into the green or the blue of the triangles. And the effect of minister zoning orders is dialing us back decades. Next slide, please. So this slide relates to Amazon and the nature of Amazon warehouses. And what I'm trying to show here is that this is a completely different kind of warehouse. This, in fact, has never really been seen before. And it's because this new model Amazon offers of just-in-time delivery changes the nature of what traditionally may be characterized in our land use zoning as warehousing. So we are seeing larger, more hybrid courier transport terminal style warehousing that functions at a much higher intensity than traditional warehousing in Ontario, even from 20 years ago. And so it's my professional opinion that the M1 general industrial zoning that the city of Cambridge is professionally considers applicable in this instance is not really keeping up with times. Zoning, next slide, please. Zoning is really there for the people. It is the strongest municipal legal tool. It's their form of law, and their form of law impacts, it touches and concerns the land most directly. Out of any other form of policy or law, zoning is the one that really dictates the nature. And zoning is there for people. It's there to plan your community well, and it should be consistent with official plan policy. And it should be contemporary in keeping up with the changes in industry. It should be reflecting the standards. And while zoning cannot dictate operation, it can't be discriminatory. It should be accurate in terms of what is happening. So, I think that other municipalities have looked at Amazon zoning, and I do think that it's my opinion, it serves in the municipal interest to keep the zoning open, but it's certainly in this case, and I'm sure many others, does not serve the community's interest at all. So I argue in my planning report that a comprehensive municipal assessment of the zoning is required, because we're dealing with a whole different type of warehouse as it relates to Amazon, and it's a change in use as a result of that. And so in conclusion, we know that this application is not consistent with the regional official plan, the local official plan, the heritage conservation plan, the Grand River watershed plan, and in my professional opinion, the general industrial zoning for the subject properties. And I want to encourage you to continue in your efforts. And I want to thank you for retaining me so I can support you in this regard. Thanks very much. Over to you, Mike.
Thank you, Susan. Folks, I don't know if you have any questions, to enter them in the chat box. And I know it takes a little time. There's a little delay here in Zoom land between thinking, typing, showing up in the chat box, etc. And so while we're waiting for questions, Susan, I want to ask you, you said something, I'm not sure I heard it exactly right, but it was, although the Crown has this duty, it somehow falls upon First Nations to prove that that duty is not being fulfilled. Is that, did I hear you correctly?
Often that's the case, yeah. So, you know, as part of the TRC's calls to action, to give you an example of one that's quite contemporary, they were lobbying the federal government, the commission itself, so former Senator Murray Sinclair and others, were lobbying the federal government to get funding to find the graves of the missing children. And it actually took a First Nation to do it themselves, to fundraise at the grassroots level to do it. And now all of a sudden the federal government's coming forward with millions of dollars, only 35 million, which includes Ontario's funding. But you know, this is kind of what's very typical of Crown behavior. So it's almost like, you know, they need to be called out in their conduct. And I think what the Pickering, City of Pickering example shows us is, in fact, when they are called out, they back right down, because what Supreme Court rulings are showing again and again and again is that there is no gray area here. You need to consult, and if you don't, it's out. And so there has been no consultation. And it's a challenging time for First Nations and for all of us, indeed, as we brace ourselves for what's coming and what we've already found. But I do know that there is interest at both Six Nations and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation.
So Susan, there are a couple of questions in the chat box now, and one of them follows exactly on the point that you've just made. So Susan Campbell asked this question: do you think a focus on Indigenous grievances is the best way to proceed in the Blair matter?
Indigenous grievances.
I think what you're talking about right now in terms of not being consulted.
I think it's just a matter of law. It's duty to consult. It's not so much a grievance as it is a rule of law. And so it's a matter of just hearing from First Nations to say, no, we in fact were not consulted. That's really all it requires. It's just difficult timing right now because there's healing ceremony going on. Many people have lost family and only finding out now. So it's a challenging time. But I think that it's not so much a matter of grievance as it is of duty, and the duty has not been followed.
So the second part of that question is this the best way to proceed? In terms of reaching out and insisting that the council and potentially the province assert their duty to consult?
It is certainly one of the strongest ways to proceed, in my professional opinion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And a follow-up question from Robin: can we also use this argument to stop the skyscrapers at 130 Water Street North?
I can't speak to that. I haven't seen those applications. So I'm gonna defer to that.
All
I
right.
know that the region of Waterloo has very recently retained an Indigenous relations advisor. So that's brand new. That's in the past 6 months. And in fact, they also just retained a racism, equity and racism advisor as well. Those positions have just started. So that's very promising.
Susan, this is a different question. Bill Kirby asks, can you be more specific about the inconsistency between the map and the municipal, regional, and Grand River watershed planning?
I might need a little clarification on that.
I think this is a question about zoning, about whether it really is a warehouse or it's something else.
Well, you know, what was permitted through the local planning appeal tribunal ruling was the 14 lot business subdivision. And as part of that, as enshrined within the regional official plan in policy, as well in the local official plan, was a series of environmental conditions. There's in fact like 6 or 7 things they need to do in order to get approval. And one of them was only a 25% building envelope. So they're trying to keep, you know, groundwater recharge happening for the benefit of the storm provincially significant wetland. There was environmental design meaningfully incorporated into the LPAT approved Millgate subdivision. And all of that is gone with this development. So they're providing a buffer, but you know, that lot coverage percentage is gone. And that was important to protecting not only the natural heritage, but I would argue professionally the cultural heritage. You know, some of those conditions are part of the Blair Heritage District Conservation Plan, right? So we were looking for more of a boutique style industry in that area. And what benefited the Heritage Conservation District, in fact, also benefited the provincially significant wetland, but all of that now is no longer need apply, right? Because of the power of the minister's zoning orders as amended. Does that answer your question? I'm not sure.
Well, I'm the interpreter for the question, and I think it does. So I'm going to ask the person who asked the question, if that didn't answer it, please put a supplementary in the chat box. And Matthew asked a follow-up question, which I'm going to tell you, but I think you just answered it. How does this new development compare to the one proposed in 2015?
Well, the scale and intensity are just completely different, right?
Yeah.
The scale and intensity. So, you know, it's just not the same. It's not apples for apples at all for those 2 reasons.
Yeah.
And, you know, I think it merits regional review. For, you know, and again, the powers of the minister's zoning orders are such that they can decide as the minister interprets them. But again, I would even debate that. And I think rightly so, as it relates to duty to consult. The minister doesn't have totalitarian power the way he did maybe 60 years ago.
So Mary McGrath is reminding us in the chat box that the MZO, the minister's zoning order for the Blair site, has not been approved yet. Yeah. By as far as we know. So that's not happened. I've got kind of a variation of the zoning question for you, Susan. Does an M1 zoning allow for overnight parking of tractor trailers?
I don't know. I can't answer that. The one thing I found quite interesting based on the other municipal review is in fact a lot of industrial zoning doesn't have rankings of density like a residential zoning does. So residential zoning will have R1, R2, R3, R4, R6. And that really relates to how many units per area, okay? And I would argue that in fact, that is missing, especially as it relates to the intensity of Amazon warehousing. And the fact that it's a hybrid of traditional warehousing, courier delivery, transport terminals, both of those uses are not permitted in the M1 zoning. So I think it's generous at best for the municipality to say that this zoning applies. It's generous at best. And in fact, I would say it's factually incorrect and doesn't consider the change in use here. And I would argue that in fact, it would be beneficial to have industrial zoning that has similar scalings. So, you know, M1 low, M1 medium, M1 high. So, you know, but I think that M1 doesn't even really apply in this instance. I don't see this as general. I don't see Amazon fulfillment centers as general industrial. I just don't.
It's a completely different beast.
It is a completely different beast based on automated fulfillment, right? It's all automated, it's different. Mm-hmm. And so it has, the goal is to move 1 million pieces a day, right? We've never seen that before. So, and again, zoning can't discriminate on operation, but there's a relationship between operation and use. And that's where I would, you know, bring in someone like David.
And I would just again remind everybody that while we've had informal confirmation from more than one source that this is being prepared for an Amazon warehouse, there's been no official confirmation of that from the city, from Broccolini, from Amazon. They're not even responding to our requests to clarify this issue. So while it looks like a duck and walks like a duck, nobody has yet said it's a duck. I'm just going to tell you a couple more things. Oh, sorry, here. This question from Nina. Would you say an MZO acts like the zoning version of a notwithstanding clause?
Acts like the zoning version of a notwithstanding clause.
Yeah, notwithstanding the planning rules, we're going to do what we want. It's a clever phrase, Nina.
Right. Yeah, it's pretty much, you know, in some ways it's almost like they've written it to be like a no holds barred. You can just talk to us, come to my office, knock on my door, and we'll see what we can get done for you. That's pretty much how I interpret. You know, it's a face-to-face meeting with the minister and you get what you want. But again, that's the centralization of power as the minister of the province is understanding it is in fact factually incorrect. It's legally incorrect. They have a duty to consult and they have to do it. It's just you always have to point it out to them. That's the problem.
I'm going to tell you, this next question I think is rhetorical, probably, Susan, but we'll give you a chance to comment if you want. And then I'm going to go to something on the Haudenosaunee Confederacy Council's moratorium and the Haldimand Tract. So first of all, is there a reason why we would not work with the First Nations community, as Susan suggests, as well as acting as the residents of the village of Blair? Are we stronger or weaker with a two-pronged approach? I think you've spoken to this, but.
Yeah, I mean, it's not to me a matter of whether you're stronger or weaker. I think I understand in some ways the nature of the question. You know, is their fight our fight? Maybe that's kind of what this person is trying to say. Mm-hmm. But it's more not so much us or them. It's more of a partnership, and it's in the spirit of treaty partnerships, right? So I would remember that the strength of in the application of their law is it's what will turn this over quickly, and okay. And your protest will as well. I mean, it's just doesn't, you know, it's not enshrined in the Constitution Act.
Well, I'm reminded of the two-row wampum direction, which is we all paddle our own boat, and we need to paddle our boat, and they need to paddle their boat.
That's right.
Could you confirm that First Nations have a moratorium over the Blair site against buildings such as that being built in Blair? I think this is the Haldimand Tract moratorium that's being referred to. Do you want to expand on that?
Yep, absolutely. So we just saw the overturning of the proposed development, right? So they pulled out. And that's as a result of, you know, the occupation of the land. So it's been taken away from Six Nations. Thousands and thousands of hectares of land have been lost. And, you know, elected Band Council Chief Mark Hill supports the Haudenosaunee Confederacy on this. And you don't often see that between elected and traditional councils, if you will. Alignment on issues. Sometimes, in fact, you really don't. We can look at Wet'suwet'en as an example of that, where there was complete contradiction between hereditary and elected under the Indian Act, Band Council elected chiefs. So in this instance, in fact, there is alignment. Chief Mark Hill, the elected Indian Act chief of Six Nations, in fact, now has been publicly stated that he supports the Haudenosaunee Confederacy and their moratorium. So yes, this area is directly impacted. It's in block 2 of the tract. So
is the developer, this is a different question. Is a developer permitted to include property not owned by them or under contract when applying for a zoning change to the MZO process?
I don't think so. If they don't own the land, how can they represent it? And if in fact the person is like if there's some kind of third-party agreement signed, I would defer to David on that, but I think that they would have to be the proprietor in order to submit a land use planning application on behalf of the site.
Okay, so David, we may pick that up when you come back. I think this maybe, Susan, will be the last question to you, and you may have to defer this back to the Blair Engaged group, but it asks if you've consulted with the Indigenous community in Blair. So I'm assuming this is a question about the offers of.
No, I haven't consulted
community
with the Indigenous
in the Blair
community.
neighborhood.
No, I haven't.
No. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Susan, for your very fulsome description, very clear, and for being patient with all of our questions. You're welcome to stay with us for the rest of the presentation, and there may be questions that come through the chat box that either you want to speak to, or you may want to go back and add to something that's there already. So we invite you to do that. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody.
Okay, I'm going to ask Tom and Tamara Hetherington to turn their microphones and their videos on. They're with the Black Bridge Community Association, and as they will describe to you, they've been engaged with the City of Cambridge for a number of years around a project, which they'll describe, and they've had some similar experiences to the ones that you're having. Now, I was teasing them a little bit when we got started about how to officially introduce them, and they are the founders, and apparently there are bottles to be washed, and there are people who are, they're chiefly in charge of washing those bottles. So I don't know exactly how bottle washing fits with the Black Bridge Community Project, but I think they're going to fill us in on all that. So Tamara and Tom, take it away.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Mike. So yeah, we're Tom and Tamara. We live in the Hespeler part of Cambridge. And so we formed the Black Bridge Community Association. So we're just going to speak to sort of our experience of with municipal democracy over the years. Next slide. So it started back in 2010, where we noticed in our corner at Town Line and River Road, there was an increasing number of trucks coming by. So we contacted the city, they came out, took a look, and let us know in a casual conversation that there's plans to expand the road, take out the historic Black Bridge, he didn't say historic, Black Bridge, and replace it with a 4-lane road and a 4-lane bridge. So not long after that, there was a neighborhood gathering, and it turned out like a lot of people were very concerned about this, and they're just like, look at our area, there's so much built-in natural heritage, and we need to do something about this. I mean, what can we do? So because of this united concern, that's what led Tom and I to founding the Black Bridge Community Association, so that we would advocate on behalf of a group, and we would have a better voice at council.
Yeah, and it, we had about 73 people, 73 members of the Black Bridge Community Association, a lot of homes in the area, a lot of support. So a lot of the neighbors carried a lot of the burden of this as well. And you know, we were 10 years really working with the city, and we're still working with the city in the region, and Push Lunch, which is in Wellington.
Yeah, so if you go to the next slide, you can see a visual just of the, you can get an idea of the geography of the Black Bridge area. So you can see on the left, the Black Bridge Canoe Launch, the actual Black Bridge is there, and that is a nationally designated historic bridge. And so we have Black Bridge becomes Roselle Road into Puslunch. And so on the right is Puslunch, Wellington County, and on the left is Cambridge, Hespeler, part of Cambridge, Waterloo County.
And originally this area was called Speedsley, and it was all formed and founded around the mill. There was a grist mill and a timber mill there, powered by 2 rivers, both the Irish Creek and the Speed River. So it's quite a unique little gem. There's a lot here. It's a bounty of natural space and built heritage. And, you know, this is our community.
Next
and we did not want to see this be destroyed.
So in the process over the 10 years, they did eventually sort of start to evaluate the area. And as Tom was speaking to, there's many heritage features in the area built in natural, and they're numbered in this. The grayed area on the right is Puslunch, which, because it was a City of Cambridge study, they didn't include evaluating Puslunch side. It was only the Waterloo side. So then so that became, this was the actual study area for the technical study, although Robert Shipley in 2013 had done a report and identified a larger area. But as I mentioned, this was the area the city looked at in terms of doing a technical study. The area for the road, though, was just Town Line Road and Black Bridge Road. But this is a technical study that evolved in us saying, like, look, we should be an HCD. We have enough heritage assets here, built in natural heritage. And eventually this became debate over a CHL boundary, cultural heritage landscape. Next slide. So here's just a visual of some of the assets in the area. Did you want to speak to any of them?
Yeah, the in the bottom on the right, that's the mill that everything was built around, and it became very apparent as we started to look into this ourselves, and the city looking into it, in the region, and Push Lynch, that there had been study after study after study done on this area. You know, feet of paper that had just been, you know, set aside or discarded or not really taken into consideration. But when you put it all together, this area was kind of a diamond in the rough and slightly protected, but slightly a backwater and forgotten about. But there was big plans for it, and we were trying to engage and participate democratically in this. Our expectations were that we would be able to do that, and we were, but maybe we'll just get into some of our challenges here, which are, you know, best practices, I would say, in preventing us from having democratic participation.
Go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So we just sort of listed out a summary of the challenges. We'll speak to each and how we manage them through the process of all these studies and reports commissioned by the city in our area.
And I'll just say, like, all these things are slightly minor, I would say. I would call them micro barriers, but they're, you know, when you put them all together, it's death by 1,000 cuts. And you add 10 years of this onto citizens that have a life and have other things to do. This becomes a massive juggernaut to just engage and participate. And you know, I thank Susan for her earlier presentation around planning and the impact that citizens can or cannot have based on you know, these type of barriers. I mean, you know, a lot of people that participated for years with us, you know, just bailed out. They'd had enough, and I couldn't blame them. I guess I like washing bottles, and so you know, a lot of us stayed with it, but the intent was to make us go away.
Really start like with the notifications. So like when we talk about the study of the Black Ridge Road, the EA that was going on, the notifications went to the residents of Town Line Road and Black Ridge. We live on River Road, even though most of our property is on Town Line Road, but our driveway is on River Road. So even though we live here, we didn't live in the right address to get notice of anything going on in the area. And even when we formed the Black Ridge Community Association to try and get notifications of all these things when it's going to come up in council, that wasn't always the case. So our solution was to every Thursday, check the agenda. Is anything coming up on our area? Keep in touch with the neighbors, and on the Push Lynch side, they had to check their we checked their council meetings minutes as well, our agendas, sorry. And so we had to be very proactive and engaged over the course of a decade. It's not as frequent now, but still, we still have to check and make sure, because we don't always get notice, even though we form the association, we represent many households.
And for 10 years, we were in front of council,
yeah,
and never really received a formal document from the entire event.
Yeah, so neighbors brought it over to us, thankfully.
Yeah.
And also too, by the time they create a project, there's the terms of reference, and before the public even engages, and that just frames everything. So here we have a study on Town Line Road, Black Ridge Road. Town Line Road is a 401 overpass. It also involves traffic from Highway 6, Highway 24, but it was outside the scope of the study area. Therefore, we could not speak to any solutions or options outside of the scope of this area.
Within the city of Cambridge.
Within the city of Cambridge. They wouldn't even work with Wellington County, which would have been fantastic, better solutions over a narrow part of the river, all sorts of things. So anyways, the terms of reference is a very limiting factor.
Yeah, and it's a powerful tool they use to just focus very narrowly on the outcome that they're looking for.
Yeah,
and we've seen it time and time again on this project and others.
Yeah, it restricts solutions. And then when it comes to the meetings, the agenda, the timing of when you get the agenda, like we'd look it up on Thursdays for Monday, then you have about 24 hours to submit your delegation form. And then you get the order of which you're going to attend or present. And so we're like, oh, we're at the beginning. So we get there, we get our neighborhood of 20, 30, 40 people attend in the chambers, and they change the agenda as we, just as we all sit down, oh, we're going to move it to the end. So everyone's got to stay till 10 o'clock at night. And rather than having the mass that was there for the first item is now there for the 8th, 9th, or 10th item. And then whereas versus post-lunch, when we would speak there, oh, the meeting starts at 7. Tom and Tamara, you'll be presenting at 7:15. The meeting starts, sorry, we started a little late. Tom and Tamara, is 7:20 okay to present? And so that was quite a contrast to Cambridge. And there was another time we were later, and we thought great because Tom was in Oshawa driving back. And we were in the room, but Tom wasn't there, and they called him up first, and he wasn't there, so he didn't get to speak. And that was frustrating because he'd been in council for 8 years. They knew who he was, they knew the Blackridge was, and that was frustrating.
In presentations, I mean, when you've got people there to do presentations, a lot of our community speak, a lot of participation from the community on a whole number of things. We saw all kinds of things come to council, which is a great way to see what's going on. But people are so limited in their ability to participate. The timers are going off. It was just a terrible experience for a lot of people. Very nerve-wracking for a lot of people being in front of a group like that large, and then be handicapped by timers and just poor management of people's attempt to democratically engage.
And even just here's the council, they get their agenda and all their information package. They have just a few days to review all of that. And then you've got your 2 to 5 minutes to try and, evoke your input, and it's just an information overload. So the process itself, and then even after you present, you can't speak to your presentation when they're discussing it, even if you can answer the questions they're asking each other. So that process really needs some reshaping, we think, so that the engagement is more dynamic.
Councillors are buried in paperwork. They've got, hundreds of items to understand, hundreds of pages of paper to go through to try and grasp what's going on, and very limited engagement from, people in the community that have a perspective. And I truly believe our neighborhood here of Hespeler and Cambridge and North Dumfries and Pushlinch, Waterloo region, everyone helped shape this. I think what's going to happen here will be quite nice, but it was 10 years of hard slogging, and
And what we found too, like the councillors, because they get so much information, what we started to do was to meet with each of them individually before the meeting, like weeks before or days before the meeting, go over the issue, the concerns, our vantage point, and let them just have a conversation. And they got to ask us great questions that they would not have asked in chambers. And then when they get to chambers, our presentation is a reminder of what we discussed at the coffee shop. And then we got more questions. We actually got more engagement from them from doing that, because I think they feel they can ask an informed question, and that maybe they can make a more informed decision and know whether they should make a decision, or maybe we should defer, feeling like they don't have enough information or they're not satisfied. So that was sort of our remedy to try and help with the information and communication, and try to improve that presentation process you have at council chambers. And then should we get into freedom of information?
I think that's probably it.
Yeah.
We're at,
so
we're at about 10 minutes.
Freedom of information, we'll just say the city was going to charge us a lot of money. We went to the region to learn more about the issues we needed to learn about in their discussions with region, because they were shuffling responsibility onto the region. And then but anyways, they just charged for photocopying. Back to the river was just a matter of, they spoke about wanting to be around the river, but yet challenged us on trying to cherish this area. And subcommittees were just asking that the agendas be more transparent, and the committee terms of people sitting on the committee is limited and not an ongoing, enduring process. So we just get fresh energy around those subcommittees. So we'll leave it at that because I know we've taken up too much time, and Karen still has to present.
Not too much time, Tamara and Tom. That was very helpful. Thank you. The you're to be commended, really. Let's just all appreciate you for the hard work you've been doing for years and years and years. And you're describing a process that sounds like, walking through mud, and it's very bureaucratic and slow and all of those kinds of things.
Yeah.
And I kind of want to ask, do you feel that you were heard by council through this? Do you feel that you were heard?
Yep.
Eventually, I think as we figured things out.
Yeah, it was 10 years.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I think so.
So what similarities, if any, do you see, but how you experienced your process and how you experienced council dealing with you, and what you're hearing from people in Blair Engaged about?
Oh,
well, that's just, that's just
MZO is ridiculous.
Unbelievable.
For a warehouse.
Yeah.
As Tom and I were going through our story, we're trying to think like Blair, like where, they already are an HCD, they're a heritage conservation district, and how that's not being weighed in and evaluated. Like that's a planning tool, like the heritage designation, that's all part of the planning. Like Susan talked about zoning. And so, things have to be shaped around your designations. And
I would have thought an MZO was for a fire hall or a pumping station.
Making ventilators, and in a pandemic.
Some crisis.
A crisis, yeah.
Some kind of emergency situation.
Yeah. So it's, I know. So we can relate, but we're fortunate now after 10 years, we're having more of a dialogue, but it took a lot of time. Democracy didn't come easy. We had to figure it out. So.
Okay, well, thank you. And I hope you look in the chat box for some of the appreciation that's being shown to you. Okay. And I want to say to the Blair Engaged people who are listening, there's a long comment in the chat box from Pat, and I'm going to ask members of Blair Engaged to respond to that through the chat box. Now I'm asking Karen Scott Booth to turn on her microphone, as she's the vice president, as we said, of ACO Cambridge. And she's, again, it's an ongoing situation, but she's going to talk about a situation I think significantly more dramatic than the Black Bridge one. And Karen,
I'm here.
Are you on the virtual stage? Okay, take it away.
Thank you. Can we have our first slide? Okay. Next slide. And then we'll move to this slide. Yeah. So I am representing ACO Cambridge and North Dumfries this evening. We are your local branch of the Architectural Conservancy Ontario. The provincial office or provincial organization operates a network of autonomous branches throughout communities across Ontario. And ACO is a registered charitable organization and has been involved through advocacy and direct action in preserving Ontario's buildings and structures of architectural merit and places of natural beauty since 1933. I've only been involved for 16 years. The next slide, please. Our branch was formerly known as Heritage Cambridge and was founded in 1970. And this would have been our anniversary year, but during COVID, we didn't have much to celebrate. Last year, 2020, we intended to celebrate, of course, and we are marking the 50th anniversary of the work of Heritage Cambridge, now known as ACO Cambridge and North Dumfries. Next slide, please. If more details, if you're interested in learning more about ACO, the provincial office, you can go to their website, and we are listed there under the Cambridge. We have access to a network of experienced and knowledgeable heritage advocates through our organization. And we have worked with a number of these resources through the main office in Toronto. And in fact, our organization has been there every step of the way with the Blackridge Community Association over the past 10 years. ACO Cambridge in North Dumfries is a volunteer-based, not-for-profit organization. We're comprised of a board of directors and a voting membership of like-minded citizens, and together we celebrate the wonderful landscapes, architecture, and rich heritage of Cambridge and North Dumfries. Next slide, please. ACO Cambridge and North Dumfries, our purpose is to promote the preservation of buildings, neighborhoods, natural areas, and architectural, historic, and cultural significance, and to enhance the unique character and quality of life in Cambridge and North Dumfries. What you may not know is that ACO Cambridge and North Dumfries own the Sheave Tower property, so we are stakeholders in this whole issue, and our branch is responsible for maintaining this property. Heritage Cambridge restored the tower in 1999, as it is the province's oldest hydroelectric generating site. Our mandate has provided advocacy, education, and communicating the benefits of our heritage and legacy. These are our prime activities in our community. Next slide, please. So you may recognize Old Mill Road. In 2016, the City of Cambridge encroached onto the Sheave Tower property and the mill property when they installed a new culvert. The city has just recently agreed to remediate their work, and they will be replacing the culvert or pulling back a portion of the culvert, and they will be remediating the vegetation and a number of other features that they had put in place that were not a part of the conservation plan. Next slide, please. We also were involved in a number of fundraisers in earlier years, and in 2011, Heritage Cambridge featured the Village of Blair as an annual fundraiser and an educational tour. We had Rare Charitable Research Reserve was our home base, where we served afternoon tea provided by Langdon Hall, and many of the heritage assets of Blair were included in the walking tour, including the Sheave Tower and a guided tour of Crookston Park Manor. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to give you a little background of what we've done up until now, and the reason I joined Heritage Cambridge in 2003 when I first moved here was I wanted to be involved in education and fundraising activities. And I have done nothing but advocacy for 16 years. Our most recent issue is the Preston Springs Hotel. The Preston Springs Hotel was originally named the Del Monte. It was built in 1880 and in the village known as Cambridge Mills. The European-style hotel was to cater to the tourists who flocked to the area to experience the healing effects of the mineral springs, the natural occurring springs in the area. The property's exterior was designated in 1992 under a Part 4 of the province's Ontario Heritage Act. So for those of you in Blair, you'll note that you are designated under Part 5. The village is a Part 5 designation, which is a heritage conservation district. And then individual properties like the Preston Springs can be designated for their significance under a Part 4. The notable aspects of this feature, this architectural structure, and its association with historic events, and the sulfur springs and the regional and provincial national importance it had, is why the building was designated. It is also a unique architectural style known as chateau style architecture. It contributes to the urban, or it contributed, sorry, to the urban streetscape, and it was a recognized landscape important to the city and to the region. For decades, the building endured cycles of decline followed by renewed hope and revival until 1990, when it stood vacant. In 2012, Paul DeHaas of Hawtown Group bought the property and assured the ACO and the Municipal Heritage Advisory Committee that he was going to restore the property and build a residential apartment. From there, it has been a downward spiral of neglect, trespassing, vandalism, and lack of enforcement on the part of the city to ensure this designated property was secured and safeguarded. In January 2020, the chief building official of the city of Cambridge requested that the designation that protected this building, this address, this site, they requested the repeal of the designated bylaw so that the building could be demolished. The building, just so you know, could not be demolished while still protected under the Heritage Act. Sorry, I lost my site. The site is a few hundred meters. This is interesting to consider. The site is a few hundred meters from the proposed LRT route, and we believe the owner, we know the owner had plans in 2017 for development that did not include the hotel. Next slide, please. So this slide is important to note. So when the proposed demolition came to council because of imminent threat of public safety, we reviewed the engineering reports and we suggested that the dotted line area, as you will see, is the original hotel. So beginning in earnest of January 2020, the ACO was deeply involved in trying to keep this building from being demolished. We proposed that they just save the original structure, that the western addition, which you can see is in the worst condition, the engineering report supported that the western addition was in disrepair and that the original structure was quite sound. And so we suggested that they remove that addition only. It was designated but not significant, and we provided rationale to the city and to council based on the engineering reports that we had received through privacy. Okay, next. Yes, next slide, please. Okay, so ACO, among other files that we are working on, from January 2020, we attended council meetings, we attended Municipal Heritage Advisory Committee meetings, we attended the Regional Heritage Advisory Committee meetings. We were preparing, so when the council voted to repeal the designating bylaw to allow the demolition, we objected to that, which we filed a notice of objection. And then we were preparing because that would take us to a Conservation Review Board hearing, which was scheduled for April 2021. We retained legal counsel. We filed for Freedom of Information documents to support our file and our appeal. We reviewed those. We had expert opinion on those files. We sent an open letter to our lawyer, actually sent an open letter to the mayor and council when the announcement came that they were going to demolish under an emergency order, which is a provincial legislation. It's under the Construction Act. It's a legislation that would allow for demolition, but it would also have allowed for other remediation to have taken place. Demolition was immediate, it should not have been allowed, and demolition was the last resort and it wasn't necessary. On December 31st, ACO attended the site. The demolition was announced Christmas Eve, and on December 31st, we attended the site of demolition and requested that the city give us a stay of demolition because we were before the courts seeking a temporary injunction. They refused. The deputy city manager was then at the after the court ruled and gave us a temporary civil endorsement for a temporary injunction to halt demolition. The city deputy manager was served, and it was too late. Next slide, please. The Preston Springs Hotel was demolished while under protection of the Part 4, and an additional protection of a heritage easement. An emergency order was issued December 24th by the chief building official, and the demolition occurred over New Year's Eve and New Year's holidays. Demolition was in fact accelerated with a maximum damage to the original heritage structure when we notified them that we were before the courts for an injunction. By the time that we received that injunction, it was now declared public danger by the ACO because they had done so much damage to the original heritage structure. Next slide, please. This is the site today. In May, the city manager acknowledged that the designating bylaw, so the Part 4 designation, is actually attached to the municipal address, not just the building. So the actual designating bylaw that protected the Springs Hotel is still in place on 102 Fountain Street. And there are actually significant landscape gardens that remain. And the city and the owner have been made aware of the requirements for this site, that under the Ontario Heritage Act and the provincial policy statement, no further site alteration is permitted prior to the submission of and review and acceptance of a heritage impact assessment and an archaeological study. These requirements are not only dependent on that designation of 102 Fountain Street, but because the building immediately adjacent to this address is also designated, if that designation were to be removed, those requirements still remain. ACO Cambridge had requested a transparent public inquiry into the events, the process, the council's and CBO's actions that resulted in the demolition of this significant protected structure. And this was denied by the city. Next slide, please. I just leave you with a little information about ACO. And if anyone wants any more information, you can go to our website listed here. So thank you so much for your interest in the work of ACO Cambridge and North Dumfries. We really appreciate the support we've had throughout our community, and I think it's very reassuring that we are finally, as a community, all parts of Cambridge seem to be coming together with this common goal. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Karen. Now, again, you're to be commended for this valiant fight and you've put up on this situation and your 16 years of advocacy. And I'm going to come back and ask you a couple of more questions, but I know, Karen, that we're working with some technical limits with you. And I'm just wondering, in terms of trying to get your video on, if it would work for you to just turn it off and turn it on again. That might bring you back onto the screen. Don't turn your computer off, just turn off your video on and off, and we'll see if
I'll try.
brings you back on the screen with us. There you are.
Okay.
Okay. So, Karen, you gave us a good blow-by-blow of that. It sounds like it was a pretty devastating decision.
It was a shock. It was a shock to us, for sure.
Now, and this is maybe leading the witness here, but did the city operate within their proper limits by doing this? Was this a deceptive move? What happened here?
This was the only way that the building could be demolished without repeal of the designating bylaw.
Was this an end run?
I'm not going to comment too much. There is still one part of this process left to unfold, and that is that the emergency order needs to be validated before a judge of the Superior Court. So that is still coming, and we will be looking at our options at that hearing.
So I know you're in the middle of this, and maybe you have to be careful, perhaps, in how you talk about this. There was something that you said in there that made me sound like it was an after-the-fact kind of decision. So did they do this and then say, kind of after the fact, we won't do this again? Is that what I heard you say?
No. So the chief building official came to the council in January of 2020 and asked to have the protection removed so that it could be demolished. And we objected to that. Council voted to do that. We objected to that. And that would take us to the next step, which would be that Conservation Review Board hearing. The date was set for that. We were preparing in good faith for the hearing. We had retained a legal firm that we've worked with in the past, and we were working toward preparing our case for the hearing. And then it came back to council November 3rd, 2020, because the owner had come to council asking to demolish the building, and council voted 8-1 not to allow the demolition, not to repeal, but to allow this to follow the due process and go to the Conservation Review Board. By the way, the one vote not to go to Conservation Review Board was the ward councillor, Donna Reed. We thought that we were there, and we delegated, and we heard the vote of council, and we thought in good faith we are preparing to go to the Conservation Review Board hearing. And it was after that meeting that we found out since that the city staff, senior staff, were aware that they were planning this emergency order.
Okay, so I know we're all listening, and the details of this may be complicated, and maybe you're not able to answer this, but if the council made a decision in good faith, then you know what happened. And what I guess I really want to know here, I'll ask you this first, and then I'll ask Tom and Tamara, is do you see any similarities between what's happening with this MZO situation, what happened in your situation?
Absolutely.
So what are the similarities? Connect the dots for us.
I believe that this is an abuse of provincial legislation to circumvent due process.
Tamara, did you have an experience like that? Do you connect the dots in that way?
Well, with yes, there's, especially because another heritage in Karen works so closely with us, and I apologize, Tom, just talking with a neighbor right now. Yeah, the due process, we found some complications, like things would be deferred. Votes were interesting. Sometimes they'd vote on the same thing multiple times. So the process was interesting. I did nothing compared to like what Karen had with Preston Springs. That was a nightmare. That was a shocker, like Christmas Eve. It's kind of like, and then you the MZO, like these are escalated things compared to sort of, I feel like Tom and I, like you said, Mike, walked through mud, whereas I feel like you guys were just walking through a knife storm with this Preston Springs and now the MZO. It's much quicker and harsher, and the due process is, you just feel like the system's not in place for you to feel like you can feel like your voice is strong enough against the Goliath.
I could just comment, Mike, on one thing that I have realized over the years, and I still find it so frustrating, is that, and I'm speaking specifically for heritage, but the HCD is under our sort of portfolio. So the Heritage Act is a provincial act, and all of the protections afforded under that act, but it is the municipality that enforces the act.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm hearing that they're not enforcing it, and I'm hearing, Tamara, you saying there's an escalating pattern here over the years of the council acting with sort of greater levels of, how would you finish that sentence? Greater levels of.
I don't know how to finish that sentence, but the provincial policy statements I feel are convenient at times. Like, they're there when they want them to, and then when they don't want to, they're not there. And we've just seen bylaws and zoning changed. So I don't know. I know Susan referred to zoning as such a strong planning tool, but yet, it can be changed with a vote.
So we're seeing some things in the chat box now, like abuse of authority, lack of accountability. So I'm inviting people I know to make some comments. If, based on what you're hearing, how would you connect the dots between these experiences? And is it, are you concerned? Is it alarming? Does this seem like?
Can I speak to the Black Bridge for just a minute?
Sure.
One one of my big frustrations with our work in the Blackbridge area was that we asked for an HCD because that theoretically would be the greatest protection for the area. We fought hard for HCD. It qualified, it met all the criteria, but the city chose to go the route of a CHL, which is was a new, and it's more of a planning protection, not a heritage protection, and then did not do a conservation plan to be attached to the CHL. So there's very little protection attached at all to the CHL designation. Yeah. But then I'm looking at the village of Blair that I know because I've looked at your conservation plan many, many times over the years, and it is one of the most thorough plans I've seen, clearly identifying everything that is to be respected, and it is completely being disregarded. So I'm very concerned that neither of these designations is protecting what they're intended to.
There are protections in place which are being ignored, or their council's overriding them, and they're failing to protect the community and the community's interests. Thank you very much for sharing those stories with us. And I'm going to ask David Donnelly, the lawyer that's been retained by Blair, to come to the virtual stage. David's with Donnelly Law, which is founded in 2008, provides legal services to leading environmental nonprofit and charitable organizations, citizen groups, and First Nations, and that he may wish to expand on his firm. But David, I know you've been involved with this, and you've heard now these stories of this, perhaps escalating pattern, and I'm wondering how you would interpret this and what advice you would have for the community. Thank you, David, for joining us. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Mike. It's a real pleasure to be here again with Blair Engaged. I have to say this is a tremendously well-organized group, a lot of very experienced people. It's a real pleasure to work with them insofar as these are very sophisticated people who are doing their utmost to try and challenge council's decision. Now, I have been tasked with the responsibility of in the agenda, it says that I am supposed to raise your expectations with respect to the conduct of Cambridge Council. And my first conclusion is this is probably one of the easiest speaking gigs of all time. After the horrible betrayal of residents by this secretive MZO request, I have to say, how could your expectations be lowered? Now, I would say that before we get to your expectations and whether this should be raised or not, I would say first, why don't we hold council accountable? Now, I would ask to share the screen with the moderator because I would like to pull up the City of Council Code of Conduct. This is the expectation with respect to how the public is to be treated. And it would help me greatly if I could pull up on the screen the Code of Conduct of Blair.
You should have sharing permissions, David.
Okay. Can you see that?
No, not yet. At the bottom of the screen, there's that green share screen button, and then you should be able to select the window that has that document in it.
I see what you're getting at here. Okay. Apologize, I'm not very, is that, okay, let's start with that. There we go. Okay, so let's start with the mayor. And this is the role of the head of council. And it says, in accordance, how to cancel this, there it is. It says, in accordance with the act, this code recognizes the fact that the mayor as head of council's additional responsibilities defined in the section 225 of the act. As a municipal chief executive officer, the head of council shall A, uphold and promote the purposes of the municipality. Critically, B, promote public involvement in the municipality's activities. C, ask his representative municipality. And D, participate in and foster activities that enhance the economic, social, and environmental well-being of the municipality and its residents. Can anyone truly say that the mayor or the acting mayor at the time of the vote in April were promoting public involvement in the municipality's activities when they secretly negotiated this MZO request, or however it came to council, and they went in camera and voted without consulting the public, and then emerged to announce that they were asking for an MZO. Now, in terms of the role of council, in 5.3, the councillors are also given a certain code of conduct. And it says accountability and transparency in decision-making. Members shall conduct council business and their duties in an open and transparent manner so that the public and staff can understand the process and rationale which is used to reach decisions. Is there anybody in Cambridge who actually understands the process and the rationale that was used to reach the decision to ask the minister for this secretive MZO? I can tell you one person who does not understand the process and who does not approve of the transparent manner, and that's Minister Clark, the Minister of Municipal Affairs, to whom the MZO request was made. The Kitchener Record published a portion of the letter that the minister wrote to Cambridge City Council saying, do your due diligence. You have to consult the public before I will consider this request. The response came not from council, which is to conduct its business in an open and transparent manner. The response to the minister came from staff who said, we are content with the process, including excluding the public. How is that council conducting its business in an open and transparent manner when it lets staff speak for council without a resolution the way it's normally done? Now, my second issue with respect to how you're being treated or holding the council accountable is the fact that as your legal representative on June the 16th, we wrote a letter to Mayor McGarry upon her return to council. And in the letter, we asked something very simple on behalf of the residents of Blair and the wider community of Cambridge. The letter asked simply, will you rescind the request for an MZO as other municipalities have done? 20 days later, there is no response. There is not even the acknowledgement of receipt of the letter. That's rude. That's totally improper. And most professional mayors that I know in the GTA would simply respond with an answer or would ask for a meeting, or in the weakest or poorest of municipalities that have the most contempt for residents, you would expect the courtesy of a reply. Now, the next issue that I have is with respect to what is happening elsewhere. And this is the part about raising the level of your expectations with respect to your council. I want to refer to a number of municipalities in Southern Ontario and what their councils are doing in response to the requests from residents who, as you know, pay the mayor's salary as well as council. For example, on June the 16th, 2021, the Halton Region Council responded to a request from the City of Oakville and made a unanimous call for the Ford government to use all its resources, including an MZO, to stop the development of the Glen Abbey Golf Course. This was after thousands of people signed signatures saying they didn't want the golf course developed as a subdivision. But that was a request on the part of the region that occurred in public with public debate. And that was what I call responsive government. On December 1st, 2021, the City of Burlington received the notice of their official plan amendment to change their official plan to put back in place the protections that have been stripped out by the Ford government with respect to protection of endangered species, creation of natural heritage system, and so on. That decision was appealed both by a quarry company, but also by the Ontario Stone, Sand and Gravel Association, meaning that the OPA must have provoked industry, and therefore it was reasonable to conclude was actually aimed at protecting the environment. One of your neighbors in Stratford, Ontario, that council on March the 8th requested that the council voted 9-2 that the minister rescind the minister's zoning order for the Gigny float glass plant, a 1 million square foot facility that would make tempered glass in the city of Stratford. Now, that original MZO was was known to the public, and council has said that the residents ought to have known or knew that that MZO request was coming. Whatever the public process, when the residents of Stratford asked council to have a full debate about the future of industrial lands in Stratford, the response of council was to vote openly after a debate to rescind the MZO that was issued previously. On March 10th, 2021, Minister Clark heard council, understood the concerns, and began the process to revoke the MZO. Finally, in Pickering, Ontario, with the Pickering Live Event Centre, on March the 21st, 2021, after residents complained, and the Mississauga of Scugog wrote a letter saying that this was a challenge to the treaty rights of the Williams Treaty people and the initiation of a court challenge by citizens and environmental groups. The minister responded to the Pickering Council request to rescind the MZO. So tonight, I'm much obliged to have Ms. Robertson, who's a very experienced land use planner, present her report, and also to the residents who have been fighting on behalf of different parts of Cambridge, different parts of your part of the world. But I have to say that there's a commonality, which is to say that in some ways, they have been very successful in terms of catching council's attention and holding them accountable. I have to say, though, that this one, I believe, is even more extraordinary than those two situations insofar as this MZO has been issued in the most secret of ways and is in fact contrary to the way that Minister Clark has said that he would like to receive requests for MZO. Now, just in conclusion, I'd like to turn to two additional issues. The first one is the question that was raised with respect to the notwithstanding clause, and is in fact an MZO similar to a notwithstanding clause, the invocation of notwithstanding clause. And my first answer is yes, this is a loophole. It's legal, but it's a loophole, and that the minister has every right to issue the MZO, whether it's moral or just or good planning. But I would also say that no, the invocation notwithstanding clause is not like an MZO for the following reasons. First, the notwithstanding clause has a 5-year limit. When it expires, either the clause must be invoked again, or it expires and the constitutionality of the thing is then back in challenge. The MZO, of course, is forever. Once that distribution center or fulfillment center is built, it's going to be there for decades, if not hundreds of years. And the quality of the environment will probably never return. The second way in which it's significantly different is that the notwithstanding clause must be invoked with the adoption of a law or a statute that invokes the notwithstanding clause, and that law must be debated in public. The public has a right to participate in that debate, and then members must stand up in the open provincial parliament chamber and be held accountable for their vote. And so I would say that in most respects, the invocation of the MZO is actually worse than the invocation of, or the use of an MZO is actually worse than the invocation of the notwithstanding clause, as horrible as most of those invocations have been. And finally, just before I conclude, I'm going to try and share my screen again because I want to compliment again Susan on her presentation. And I hope this shows you graphically where the Haldeman tract is located. Danny, is that working? Oh, sorry. Well, I'll try it one more time. Well,
David, I'm gonna stop your share and then let you do it again. Just try selecting your whole desktop this time, rather than just a single window.
Okay. Well, this is proof that I shouldn't be allowed anywhere near technology. Anyway, just for the benefit of the viewers tonight, Blair is in the middle of the Haldeman tract. This land is certainly covered by the moratorium that's been issued by both branches of the Haudenosaunee Six Nations Council. And I have to say, again, I'm very grateful to Susan to be raising these issues. I think they're critically important, and based on the events of the past few weeks, I think it's everybody's responsibility, not just your council, not just the federal government, not just the provincial government, but it's every citizen's duty to make sure that we're not violating any further any of the treaty rights. And it looks, to my eye anyway, that this MZO is a complete violation of the duty to consult First Nations. You have to remind yourself why the Haldeman Tract was granted in the first place. It was in recognition of the service to the Crown in the American War of Independence. I mean, people fought and died for the Haldeman Tract, and I just think that that promise, after all the promises that have been so cruelly broken, that promise should be kept. And I think that Cambridge Council, if it turns out that they didn't consult with First Nations, and that's what the record certainly suggests, then I say shame on Cambridge Council, and they should reverse that decision immediately. And with that, those are my submissions. Thank you.
Thank you, David. David, there's a question in the chat box, and it goes like this from Tim. Is Catherine McGarry wrong when she says the MZO is only a provincial matter?
I'm trying to think of the metaphor, but that's like saying my toes are not a matter for my leg. Come on now, let's get real. The minister has been very forthright on TVO and in other media that he will not consider MZOs unless the ask comes explicitly and directly from municipal councils after a full public consultation. So, you know, I really, this is more of a plea to the minister, which is please abide by your word. Please send Cambridge Council back to the drawing board. Absolutely positively, the author of the MZO is certainly not the provincial government. They're the ones that pass the law, but they do so at the request of Cambridge Council.
So David, if people on the in the audience tonight and in the community were to make a very clear, simple demand of the mayor at this stage, what would you suggest that simple demand be?
Follow the lead of Stratford and Pickering and ask the minister to tear up the request for the MZO. That's the only honorable, honest thing to do. That council, I believe, betrayed residents, and the only way to make up for that is for council to have a public debate and then to vote in public. If they want to stand by the request from the MZO, then they've got to do public consultation, and then they have to have an open vote. There is absolutely, positively no basis whatsoever for having conducted that debate in secret. It shouldn't have happened.
I think you said to us in a previous meeting, David, that it actually voting on an MZO in camera is contravenes the conditions of what constitutes a legitimate in-camera meeting.
Right. So the Municipal Act has exemptions where you may invoke to allow council to go in camera, which is really a secret meeting. They involve things like human resources matters, somebody's being fired, claims of sexual harassment, or so on. It involves matters of the purchase and sale of property where you want to negotiate the price and you don't want the developer to know. And in some situations, it involves litigation. That is, the city is being sued or the city is suing someone. The idea that a request for an MZO, which is not a legal instrument, it is not legal in any way, shape, or form, and it absolutely positively does not involve litigation in any way, shape, or form. The fact that somebody could claim that that was eligible for the exemption is complete and utter nonsense, and that the mayor and council should be held accountable for explaining why this was done in secret. I certainly understand that it benefited the developer to do this in secret. I totally understand that. How did it develop the public and the public interest? And if it didn't benefit the public and the public interest, then it should not have been done. And the mayor and council should again request the minister to rescind their request for an MZO, and the mayor and council should apologize.
David, Bill Kirby asked this question, and was the MZO not requested of the minister by the property owner? So did Broccolini make the request? How would you respond to that?
Well, like everyone else here tonight, I don't know. I presume that Broccolini made the request. I don't know if Broccolini has spoken to, or the representatives has spoken to the premier or to the minister. I don't know whether Broccolini was lobbying city council or the acting mayor or the current mayor or some of the councillors. I mean, there are a lot of extremely good questions that need to be answered before the request for the MZO comes before council. But of course, that train left the station when council went in secret to issue the request for the MZO. So look, a lot of this dirty laundry is going to come out. It does sooner or later. If you look at Peter Tabbins in the NDP, when he started looking at the lobby registry of Doug Ford, he found that it was very obvious that the Xinyi, a Chinese company, had been lobbying Doug Ford for the MZO that was issued in Stratford. When that news tumbled out, when it was made public, and the mayor and council were forced to confront the fact that that request or that issuance of an MZO was based around lobbying that was never transparent, never debated publicly, council voted for the MZO to be rescinded, and it will be. So I think there's a lot. I think it's possible that there's some dirty laundry in this case. I think the mayor and council probably knows what that dirty laundry is. And I think that the residents should actually be asking them to divulge everything they know about how this MZO request transpired.
I think that's your main point, David, which is that there's no transparency here. And Bill, who asked the original question, had a follow-up, which I'm not going to ask you to answer, which is, if you don't know, why are you saying that the council made the request? And Laura responded by saying that the council did make the request for the MZO. The question is, the developer may have asked Cambridge City to request an MZO. The developer may have lobbied Doug Ford, but the council did have to write a letter to request the MZO.
That's true, but most sophisticated municipalities in Ontario, when there's a staff report, have at the end of the planning staff report a line that says financial implications for the municipality. And that's a requirement that staff actually turn their mind to the question of how much is this going to cost the municipality? And in some cases, what is the benefit to the developer? So there are two huge question marks around this MZO request. First, what is the cost of the servicing? In the Xinyi Stratford case, there was a $6 million payment that had to come from the municipality to cover the cost of the servicing, which would be paid back over time through the development charges and so other service charges. But there was a cost to the municipality, and Stratford, to its credit, was upfront and honest about it. They were open about it. Well, does anybody know how much this MZO is going to cost the municipality of Cambridge? Does anybody turn their mind to figuring out whether they're going to make their money back on the DC, to the development charges, whether the servicing costs are going to pay back money to residents? Does anybody know what we call the lift? So what is the value of this MZO to Broccolini? Because MZOs are worth a lot of money. They speed up the development and they get you to jump over a number of hurdles in one bound, saving the developer a lot of money. So I think, again, one of the ways that this Cambridge Council needs to be held accountable is they should be very forthright with residents. How much is this going to cost residents? And how much is Broccolini getting as a result? If this MZO is issued, how much is Broccolini getting? And then the last question would be, well, if you're going to give Broccolini all this money, if in fact it does benefit them, which it seems pretty obvious it will, otherwise why would they ask for it? If it's going to be benefiting Broccolini to this extent, why don't the mom and pop stores in downtown Cambridge, which are struggling with COVID, why aren't they getting a similar lift? Why aren't they getting an MZO? Why aren't they getting a tax break? Why aren't they getting some kind of grant or a gift from Cambridge City Council? Goodness gracious me, I must say, I don't know if Broccolini has any other developers in Cambridge. Maybe they do, maybe they don't, but they're a Montreal-based company. I would have thought they were people that, as a result of COVID, it wouldn't be some developer coming from out of town that would have got to the front of the line for subsidies and benefits from the city of Cambridge. I would have thought that it would have been the people who have been living there for decades, sometimes for generations. I would have thought that the people most in need would have been first in line for some kind of benefits or subsidies or lift or an MZO, whatever it is, what do you even call this? It's a gift. I think the first question should be asked of the mayor is not, will you rescind the MZO? It's, why did you give this gift? Why did you request this gift to a developer and not for the people who need it most?
Thank you, David. You've raised some very important questions that need to be asked, and they need to be asked by citizens. They need to be asked by the media. And there's a comment here from Maureen Cowan, and Maureen, your comment's going to take us to the next portion of the agenda, and Mary McCarthy is going to come on the virtual stage. Maureen says, it seems as though Broccolini and the City of Cambridge may be acting in concert against the citizens of Blair and surrounding areas. As all of our inquiries and efforts are being stonewalled by council, the region has yet to be of assistance, and the province is also not responding to letters and inquiries. What is our next best step to push this forward? So Mary, if you're leaning forward, David, you've got that leaning forward, I want to say something look. Do you want to say something before Mary comes to the stage?
I didn't dress up for nothing, Mike. So yes, I would like to dip my oar in the water here, and that will be my last comment of the evening. Susan Robertson did us a real favor by drafting this report, and it's her conclusion, very experienced land use planner, that this is not just a local issue, but a regional issue. I mean, it has to be, right? Like whether it's traffic patterns, employment patterns, designation of employment land, an overall strategy for dealing with the distribution of jobs, jobs where people live, in terms of the urban form. This absolutely positively engages the region. They have a heavy responsibility in this to correct the mistakes of the Cambridge Council. I mean, is this the right place for such a huge industrial facility that relies basically on truck traffic for its lifeblood? So absolutely, Susan has belled the cat here. We need the region to weigh in on this, ask the province to pause this request for an MZO. The region now has to correct the mistake of Cambridge by conducting its own public consultation, which must be done in the open, transparently. And then there needs to be a staff report that people can review. And then people need to have the right to appear before regional council. And then regional council needs to go out in public and vote in public on whether this MZO should be upheld. So absolutely, positively, there's a critical role for the region to play in this. And again, I thank Susan for turning our attention to this very important governance matter.
So we're going to maybe improvise here for a moment. And I see in the chat box that Michael Harris, a regional councillor, is in the meeting. And Michael, we're going to give you an opportunity, if you'd like to take it, to come on the screen and say a few words. You can say through the chat box if you'd like to do that. I see that you're saying that you've asked regional council for staff to update the council on any involvement the region has in improving this development. David Donnelly's just made some comments towards that. Michael, would you like to come on and say a few words? We'll need to make you a co-host to do that. So I'm waiting for a signal from you. There you are. Looks like you're on the screen. Okay, take it away, Michael.
Yeah, I was just kind of casual. I'm up north, so my connection may not be great here, but I did ask at council last week, and I was going to post the link to the video of council at the end of the meeting. So folks go on YouTube. New business item, I raised it at council and asked for staff to get back to us on any involvement that they would have in the approval of this development. Obviously, I believe from what we were told, a transportation study. You know, I'm happy to correspond with others, as I have just recently. Angelo Lamberto from the residents group obviously had my ear for a couple hours one day on this, and I promised him that I would raise it at regional council, which I did do. You know, I obviously the region doesn't typically hear development or approve developments. That's a lower tier responsibility. MZOs are the request of the lower tier, which has obviously been done. But I'm happy to advance this in any way at the region if in fact we do have jurisdiction to do so. I will say to you, in addition to the residents of Blair, I have had several folks contact me within the City of Kitchener. I represent Kitchener on regional council. Many of the folks in Lower Dune area are equally as concerned, I think, as are the residents of Blair. specifically pertaining to the traffic issues. So, I mean, I'll put my email on the chat, and happy to, you know, talk with folks, you know, in the next little while on how, you know, this can be dealt with at the region, as I know it's a significant matter in the community, and go from there.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you for joining our meeting tonight. Thank you for those remarks. You're going to put your email in the chat box. That's very helpful. And thank you for being engaged with Blair on this issue. I'm going to call Mary to the stage again, and we're going to talk about what to do next. And Mary, just before you talk about what to do next, I want to speak to a part of what Maureen's saying. And you may be concerned that you're being stonewalled and not being answered. And it is a concern that you're not being answered. But there's a part of this I think that you should interpret positively. The minister has not yet issued an MZO. And the minister could have moved more quickly and could have said things around issuing an MZO and has not. And I think that it's a distinct possibility that the things that you are doing is making the minister think very, very carefully about this. And the longer he thinks about it, the more likely it is he's not going to issue an MZO. So first of all, I would say that. Secondly, in terms of the lack of response from your council, it definitely shows a lack of leadership, and they may be equally befuddled about what to do next, because they were moving forward and now they're not. And they're not moving forward because you've put up some obstacles to them. And while it may feel to you like this situation is in neutral, it was moving forward. So it's progress for something that was moving forward to be in neutral. I don't know how long it's going to be here, and we have to keep pushing back. And this sets the tone, or sets the context for what Mary is going to describe to us next. So Mary, tell people what they can do to help move this issue forward.
Awesome. Thanks, Mike. I think Danny's going to share a screen here. Okay, so yes, as Mike has said, we are very hopeful because the minister has not yet responded. Well, he did respond to the city's request for an MZO. He did send them a letter and ask them if they had completed their public consultation, and city staff sent a letter back saying they felt they had done the process. So, but he has not yet approved that MZO request. So we are going to continue the fight. I think we're doing all the right things. And to your points, Mike, I think, I mean, I could be wrong, but perhaps one of the reasons why we are in neutral is because it's very difficult to argue with our arguments. I think after listening to the speakers tonight and hearing what David Donnelly has to say, and Susan especially, I think that, you know, trying to find a way around this, it has got to be a challenge for them. So anyways, we're hoping that they're still listening and that they're still hearing us, and that even though they're not responding, and that they will change their minds. So these are some of the actions that we're hoping to take, and we invite everyone in this meeting to join us. So we will continue with our protests at the roundabout at Blair Road and Fountain Street. There are two roundabouts in Blair, and this is the roundabout at Blair Road and Fountain Street. And we'll be at the four corners, not in the middle, but at all four corners on the grass side. And that will be this Thursday, July 8th from 4:30 to 6 p.m., which is the high traffic time at that roundabout. So please join us. You just come out, bring a sign. If it's a lawn sign, if it's a homemade sign, it doesn't matter. Please come join us and just help us get the car horns honking and travelers who go through that intersection to understand the implications when there are 200 transport trucks a day going through there. So the second thing that we're asking people to do is to write a letter to the editor. This is a powerful tool to let the community know what's happening. You can even ask a question, or just, it doesn't even have to be long. Sometimes just 3 or 4 sentences is a very effective letter. And the media is listening. I think we have some media here with us tonight. Actually, I saw in the list of participants, and we're so grateful to them that the media is actually engaging with us, unlike City Council. So please write a letter to the editor, keep it focused and short is ideal, 300 words or less, and you can email it to letters@therecord.com. And then the third thing to do, we are a group entirely of volunteers, of residents, just like the other groups that have been speaking tonight, giving a lot of time and energy to this cause on top of our daily lives. But we do have some amazing experts that we've been working with, some of whom you've met tonight. And we've been creating pamphlets, and we'll be creating some videos, and we're doing a lot of different things. And we are still in fundraising mode to make all those things possible. So we would very, very gratefully accept any support to our cause. And you can make donations via our partner, Small Change Fund. And there's a link to, there's a donate button actually right by Small Change Fund logo on our website. And the website is saveblair.com. So you head over there and you can make a donation and help support our cause. Doesn't matter if it's $5, $500, any penny counts. And so we would be very, very grateful for that.
Mary, you could, $5,000 would be okay too, right? Like $5, 500, 5,000.
Amazing.
It would yes. be terrific, right?
Okay. $50,000 for sure. We'll spend it wisely.
So just to reinforce what Mary has said, we need to maintain the pressure. The more visibility there is of the community rejecting this, that increases the chances of the minister not issuing an MZO. And that's job one. Job one is to not have an MZO issued. Job two is to then continue to put pressure on the council for them to engage in a planning process with you, which if an MZO is not issued, will then have to happen. And then for you to do, for us all together to do the things to persuade council to oppose this project. So we're wrapping up now. Thank you very much for spending your evening with us. I really invite you in the chat box just before you go to say, make any closing comments you want to make about how this evening was for you, any appreciation that you want to show for Blair Engaged, for the people from Tom and Tamara and Karen for being with us tonight, for the hard work that your leadership group is doing. We're going to leave the meeting open for a little while and the chat box for a few minutes so that you can make comments and so that you can get Michael Harris's email. Susan Robertson put a couple of links in the chat box to the Haldeman tract images, for example, that you'll see in the chat box right now. The link to make a tax deductible donation is there. Maureen Cowan says, we're very fortunate to have such an outstanding leadership team at Blair Engaged. That's absolutely true. Steve says, thank you, everyone. Very informative. So we're going to formally close the meeting. Thank you. We're going to leave the chat box open so you can share things. Tom and Tamara say thank you for such a well-organized meeting, inviting us to your well-organized group. You keep us going and we need to stick together. Michael Harris, your regional councillor, says your local PC MPPs would be key. Steve Clark will be asking them what they think on this as well. Please post a link to watch the presentation again if possible, says Phil. And we actually have to download this before we can post that link. We will do that. Mary has just posted the City of Cambridge's policy on citizen engagement. We're going to keep moving forward, folks. Thank you all very much. We'll be in touch. We'll see you next time. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.